Hello, today I'm going to walk you through how to install Tyk Operator into a Kubernetes cluster. For me, I'm going to be running everything locally using Minikube, and I'll be using Tyk Pro Edition. So here we are in the open source repository. This is going to walk us through how to install Tyk. I already have my Kubernetes cluster created. There's a fresh slate. No commands have been run on it, so we're going to do this from the very beginning. And then in the README, I'll head over to installing the Tyk operator and we'll follow this through. So let's switch on over to our Visual Studio Code. We'll use this as our terminal, and I can say kubectl, or for short K, get nodes, and K, get deployments, Helm list. So we have Helm and kubectl installed. We're going to need to do both. Okay, clear. And now we can start. So connecting to Tyk. In order to tell the operator how to connect to Tyk, we have to create the secret that it's going to read from. So first we're going to create the namespace where we're going to run that, and then we're going to create the secret. So I'll paste that in. Now we have to sub out these environment variables, of course. And so the URL is where my dashboard is because I'm running Pro. If you're running open source, you'd give it the gateway URL. And if you're running hybrid, again, you would give it the dashboard because the dashboard is your control plane. So here I am in Tyk Cloud. I've deployed a control plane, and here's the URL for it. So I'll go ahead and I'll copy that and then go back to Visual Studio Code. And we can paste that URL in there, and you should preface it with HTTPS. Whoops. Okay, perfect. Good to go. Next step, we want Tyk mode. So Tyk mode is, there's two, there's OSS and there's Pro. And then we can see that in the README that covers both of them. Next up is Tyk org and Tyk auth. Both of these come from the actual control plane. And so these are dependent on the environment that we're running in. So let's see what it looks like. So org and auth. So I'm going to go under here, under users, and I'll just select my my admin account. Typically, we would create a new user and use that as a CI/CD bot or something. But just to keep things short and sweet, I'll just use these credentials. So I'll copy the org ID first, and we'll sub that in. And next, I'll select my user's API IP, user's API key, excuse me, and then use that for Tyk auth. And then we create that, and we see secret Tyk operator config is created. And so we'll just stick here. So installation, and the next step after that is we can see what it looks like. So if we copy this command and paste that in, kubectl get secret Tyk operator conf, output it into JSON, and let's see what it looks like. So here's our configs. These are now base64 encoded, and so if I take my URL and I paste that in and then pipe it through a base64 decoder, we see our URL again. Okay, great. Next step is to install the CRDs. So we're going to do kubectl apply -f helm CRDs. And just like that, they're created. Next step is we have to install cert manager into our cluster. And so I'll install that now. And we actually have to wait for that to run. So this is a dependency. We use cert managers to do TLS provisioning in the cluster. So if we do kubectl get all in the namespace cert manager, we can see all that starting to come up. Just a couple more seconds while that comes up. Next up, install Tyk Operator. So we have to run the following to deploy the Tyk Operator. We're going to use Helm, as we can see. So we're going to do Helm install Tyk Operator, and we're going to use -helm, and then we're going to install in the Tyk Operator system namespace. Let's go ahead and do it. Okay, that's it. You've deployed the Tyk Operator. Click here for more information. Now if I do kubectl get pods in the Tyk Operator namespace, Tyk Operator system namespace, we see we have a pod here. This is our operator, and if I do kubectl pod, k logs, and then paste that in. What am I missing here? pods. Oh, Tyk Operator system. Okay. Now we can see that it's running. We have our API definition and the other ones, the other reconcilers running. Cool. So the next step is let's deploy an API. And so what I'll do is I'll go back here and we will do kubectl apply -f. And first I'll pull it up here. So API access YAML. So what this is we're going to be deploying an API definition. This is going to protect our API. This is the unique metadata name. Here's the name of the API that's going to show up in our control plane. The protocol, it's active. It's going to reverse proxy to http://bin.org. Here's the listen path on the gateway that's going to reverse proxy to that target URL. And then we're going to protect the API with an authorization token. And then also at the same time, we're going to deploy a security policy. The security policy is active, and it's going to provide us access to the API that we're deploying above. And you can see here, we're going to deploy, we're going to give access to http://bin API. That's this metadata name. And then the namespace where we're deploying this to. And so I'll just switch this to default. And then I say K8S, and I'll use just to check. Okay, so I am in the default namespace. That's perfect. So now what I can do is I can deploy kubectl apply f, and then we're going to give it the name of, we're going to give it this file. So docs policies API access.yaml. It's been created. You might be wondering, is there an order that this has to get created in? Well, no. When we write this YAML, we don't care. Under the hood, yes, the API has to get built first and then the policy. Otherwise, there's a race condition. And so we don't have to worry about that as we write the YAML. The developer doesn't have to worry about that. The Tyk operator takes care of making sure that gets reconciled properly under the hood. And so if I go back to our control plane now and I refresh, well, hopefully if everything has worked, we'll see there's my API that's been generated from my YAML. And here's my policy that gives me access to that API. So let's go ahead. We're going to create a key. We'll choose the API. I could choose the policy, but for now I'll just go choose my API. And now I'll create and do not expire key. And everything is working great. So in order to go and test this with the gateway, I'd create an edge cluster, but I'm not going to do that for the purpose of the demo. Yeah. So let's talk about well, the ability to create and apply multiple times. So I can go and apply this as many times as I want, and nothing's going to happen, just because it respects what we have declared. So this is what we call declarative configuration. The nice thing is if I go and if I delete any of these resources, so if I say delete Tyk policies, for example, and I delete that policy, see it says it's deleted, the policy is gone, but now if I reapply it, it's back. And let's go see what it looks like. So I'll refresh my control plane, and now we have our policy back. So what's really important is because I'm doing this all declaratively through the Tyk operator, the API IDs and the policy IDs, all of that stays the same. Why this is important is if I create a token that gives me access to my API will continue to work. The token will continue to work for that API. So you know, let's go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and deploy to create the Ingress. Let's go ahead and deploy that. Okay, that's being deployed. We're going to deploy. Now it's being deployed. So if I copy this URL and I go back here, I'll open up a new terminal and I'll just do a curl just to the HTTP bin endpoint here, and I'll to the get. Oh, it's still coming up. So that's going to take a second. In the meantime, what I want to do is I want to run my second API definition. So what we're going to do now is we're going to run UDG1. So what this is I'm going to use Tyk's universal data graph, Tyk's UDG feature to stitch together a REST and a GraphQL API and then present them as a single endpoint on the front end. So what that looks like is, let's take a look. So we have our API definition again for UDG1. And then here's the name, it's keyless. And so what we have here is you can see that we have a schema that's in line, and the schema gives us a country object, a query, and then a REST country object. And so here we can take a look at this. We see we have a query that comes from a GraphQL data source, and here's the URL where it's getting the data from. Okay, and then I can see this is for the countries query. So the countries query is going to fetch data from countries Charterblade and return a country type. Taking a look at the country type, we can see we have countries Charterblades will return name, encode, and REST country. So let's keep scrolling down. So here we're going to see REST country type. And this field will actually come from a different API endpoint. REST country, the type, will come from a completely different API, a REST API at restcountries.eu. Furthermore, we're actually going to inject the response of the first request into the request of the second. So let's see what this looks like in the UI. It might be easier to explain. So now I'm going to do kubectl apply -f docs, configs, sample, and then udg1, and that's been created. So if I go back to our dashboard here and I refresh my API screen, now we're going to have universal data graph example, right? And so I can go under schema, and we can see here's that same schema. If I go under data sources, actually, let's start with the playground. So I'm going to go to the playground. I'm going to go to query, and then now I can build out that query, and we can see what it looks like. So I want to query the countries query, and then I want the name, I want the code, and I want the REST country. And then here I want alt spelling, sub-region, and population. Why not? And then we're going to fire off that API call. So it's a lot of data we're getting back, and here it is. And so now we can see that we have a countries array that's come back, and each entry is of type country, where name and code came from one GraphQL endpoint, and then REST country returned this data from a completely separate endpoint, and then Tyk stitches those together using UDG feature, and then presents those as a single API on the front end. Well, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and thanks for watching.